Hello and welcome. So earlier this year, one of the messages I got on LinkedIn was from someone who was trying to connect with me. I'm going to read part of it now. The person is called Damilare. I have been using Web4Africa for a while and found it has been acquired by HOSTAFRICA. How were you able to build Web4Africa? So the backstory is simple. I started Web4Africa in 2002 in Accra, Ghana. So the first question was, how did you get the initiative? So in this context, the question would mean, how did I get the initiative to start Web4Africa? So back then, in 2002, there were very few, if any, web-related companies. Web design was a very new and niche industry, much less web hosting. So back then, I started Web4Africa out of necessity, out of the need to survive. I was in a new environment that had to survive. I had no means of income, and I had to use the little skills I had back then to make an income for myself. So I started with basic graphics design, like flyers, designing flyers and so on. So because of that, I eventually drifted into web design. Back then, I had some basic web design skills, and I started creating websites for companies and organizations that needed a web presence. The name Web4Africa came around at a time in my personal life when I was gaining some knowledge about African consciousness, and that motivated me to create a company that would be offering web-related services to the African market. This was how the name Web4Africa came about. So the number 4 is just a short form or an abbreviation or a funky way of saying Web4Africa. So the next question here is, how did you build the team? So back then, I started by myself, and I was the team, if I could say so. So it was only when it became necessary to hire people to offset some of the workload that I started hiring. And if I remember correctly, the first set of people I hired were for customer service. By then, Web4Africa had evolved into a web hosting business. So I rented an office space that was big enough to accommodate the number of people I needed to hire at that time. I hired based on necessity. So the third question I have here is, did you raise funding for Web4Africa, and how? No, I did not raise funding for Web4Africa. So Web4Africa was entirely bootstrapped, in the sense that I did not start with any amount for investments. I started with zero, if I could say that. So every little money I earned, I put it back into the business, and that was how I was eventually able to scale the business over a period of time. So there was no point at which I gained any investments or raised any funding. So it was entirely self-funded, and the income was rolled back into the business, and that was how it was able to scale over time. There are advantages with raising funding, and there are advantages with bootstrapping. Each of them come with different sets of challenges, but either way, it was organically grown over time. The fourth question I have here is, how did you go about marketing? So back then, 2002, there was no social media. The internet was still new. So in order to market, one needed to market offline to draw people to the internet. One was trying to sell a service that was going to put people online. So advertising online itself was pointless or almost impossible, because relative to the population, there were very few people online back then. So one had to convince people who had regular businesses to put their business online, convincing them that they could reach many more people eventually, or they could reach an international audience where their business was positioned for that. One strong example of the types of businesses I was targeting in the initial phases were companies that had to do with travel and tour services. So a company that was in Ghana that needed to draw an international audience to visit Ghana and explore the facilities that Ghana had to offer. It was efficient for them to market themselves on the internet, because people in the Western world back then, or some of them, already had access to the internet. So it was a bit niche, but that was the only way one could market back then. So one was marketing at strategic industries that would gain any useful benefit from promoting themselves online, especially when they had an international market. So that was it back then. So if I remember correctly, one of the ways that I was marketing Web4Africa initially was through printing flyers or advertising in Mirror. Mirror was a weekly publication owned by Graphic Communications in Accra, Ghana, and they had a weekly section of their paper that was focused on classifieds. So it was very cheap. I could afford it. So I was using classified advertising in the Mirror, in the Saturday Mirror, to reach out to the population. So back then I was promoting the domain name registration, web hosting, and web design. Yes, as a package anyway. Yes. So the fifth question I have here is, how do you manage the business and how do you work on making the business a profitable one? There are certain principles around business, and these principles are universal. They apply to just about any business, and one of them would be buy low, sell high. It's that simple. That is the most basic principle for making profit in any business. Now, you buy as low as you can get away with, you sell as high as the market will offer. And now, in specific details in this particular context, I tried to scale the business as fast as possible. When the market was getting bigger, I priced the domain name and hosting to be as low as I could get away with, whilst trying to reach to as big a market as possible. So the strategy back then was to appeal to the mass market, and in that case, the numbers were very important. One wanted to sell as many domain names, as much hosting accounts as possible, and the scale would eventually bring about some level of profits. That was the strategy back then. The other part of the question was, how do you manage the business? So I managed the business by myself. With the skills I built over time from managing this business, I was able to hire the right people, and then these people would manage the operational aspect of the business while I supervise the people themselves. So the sixth question I have here is, how do you manage yourself with the stress of running the business? I have to laugh because over time there was a lot of stress with running the business, and this stress came in different forms. For example, there's a server issue affecting a lot of websites, affecting a lot of angry customers. One had to manage the communication, manage the restoration of the server, and so on and so on. So it could get very, very stressful. And one of the ways I could manage the stress back then was to separate my personal life from the business life, such that I intentionally have a mental downtime when I am off the clock and with my family. So that helped to balance the lifestyle and to eventually have a healthy lifestyle. So I think that is a pivotal aspect of managing stress around business or around one's professional life, such that when you're with your family, you try to be happy and forget about the stressful aspect of the business. And when you are resuming fresh, you hopefully have fresh ideas or fresh initiatives to fix whatever challenges there were in the business at that time. The seventh question I have here is, how did you make the service so cheap? Well, I would say cheap is relative. In this context, I would interpret cheap to mean affordable. So one of the ways we were able to make the services from Web4Africa affordable is something I had alluded to earlier, and that is scale. It's that simple, scale. When one is selling at a particular scale, one can afford to make the services relatively affordable for the mass of the market. For example, in terms of web hosting, I started by buying a reseller account many years ago, and eventually I outgrew it and started renting dedicated servers. Eventually we outgrew that and I started investing in buying infrastructure. Started buying the infrastructure, the networking equipment, the server equipment, and we started building our own network, started building our own equipment in different data centers. And that was a different level of scale. And that afforded us the opportunity to eventually sell at relatively affordable prices. So, two things are involved directly: scale and operating at the higher level of the supply chain. So, eventually, by the time I sold Web4Africa, we were operating at the highest level of the supply chain, in the sense that we own every aspect of the server equipment that we're using for the hosting. We own all the networking equipment, we own all the IP addresses, every aspect of the business, we owned it. And in terms of domain name, Web4Africa was an ICANN accredited domain name registrar. We were dealing with the registries directly, with the .com registry, with the .ng registry directly. So we're getting the domain names at cost price. So there was no middleman. So because of that, we could afford to sell the services at a reasonable price. Now, it's also not economical for a starter to go to the top of the supply chain. It's not economical. It's usually more sensible to move towards the top of the supply chain when one has built the scale, one has built a mass market, when one has a large number of customers. So that is what happened with Web4Africa and why we were able to sell at affordable prices. So the last question I have here is, can I become your mentee? Yes, absolutely. You can send relevant questions when you have them, and I'll be happy to respond to the best of my ability. Yes, that's the best I can say at this time. Anyway, thank you for the questions, and I hope my answers have been useful, and I hope that you who is watching me are also going to find them useful, and I hope I inspired you to do better at what you are doing, and I hope that I can also help you to be the best version of yourself, and I hope that I can help you to also scale your business and that you can also grow to the peak of your potential. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the next video. Cheers.